design is spinning faster than we or our ancestors could have imagined.
It's hard to stay on top of things because the world is more complicated, but the reality is that the more information you have, the better choices and decisions you're going to be able to make.
السيدات والسادة، أهلاً ومرحباً بكم في متحف المستقبل وفي ثاني أيام منتدى دبي للمستقبل 2024 أكبر تجمع عالمي لخبراء ومصممي المستقبل. الآن مع جلسة حوارية بعنوان كيف يمكن لتجارب العيش في المستقبل أن تغير الحاضر، يديرها برندن ماكجيتريك، مدير التصميم الإبداعي في متحف المستقبل. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Museum of the Future and to the second day of the Dubai Future Forum 2024, the world's largest gathering of futurists. Now, a panel titled Experiences of the Future, How Can They Inspire Change Today?, moderated by Brandon McGetrick, Creative Director of the Museum of the Future.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first session of day 2 of the Dubai Future Forum. We're extremely happy that you're here. I hope that day 1 was stimulating and full of, fascinating, inspiring conversations and inspiring presentations, and of course, plentiful pastries and all the essentials of a great conference. So I'm Brandon McGetrick. I'm the creative director of the museum. I do feel obliged, as I do every year, to speak on behalf of the museum and share our deep regret that the kind of exhibitions and the museum experience as we present it to the public isn't accessible to you, maybe our keenest audience imaginable. But nevertheless, one thing I would like to say also on behalf of the museum is, in addition to trying to create something which is a kind of interface for the public and trying to kind of provide areas of sort of lighting sparks or turning on light bulbs, however you want to say it, trying to speak to a public that isn't necessarily directly or even consciously engaged in issues related to the future or all the sub-themes that kind of extend from it. We also believe that one of the key kind of areas that the museum is sort of wanting to be very active in, and one of our contributions that we'd like to make to Dubai and to the region and to the world generally, is to provide a venue and a platform for people who are deeply involved in the future, deeply involved in thinking about all the issues that will shape the world as it continues to evolve, to create a space for them to meet and to speak with each other and to host vital conversations, critical conversations, and create a venue where that sort of exchange not only is possible, but it's encouraged and it's sort of structured in a way. And in doing so, hopefully we can help kind of cultivate a community of people who are bringing a very similar mentality than the one that sort of produced the museum and that drives it every day, which is really a belief that the future matters and that each of us matter to it, and that it's really our obligation to try to actively engage it and kind of resist the forces of complacency or pessimism and all the different feelings that obviously can shape the way that we think about and imagine the future. So I just want to, again, thank you all for being here and express how deeply excited we are to be able to host this and to be able to be a part of the sort of collective effort that this room represents and all of the things you do when you leave this room. So this talk is called Experiences of the Future, How Can They Inspire Change Today? And we have 2 absolutely brilliant people on the panel who will speak a bit about their personal practices, about the things that they do, future-related things that they're engaged in, and then we'll have a conversation. So first of all, I would like to talk a little bit about these 2 wonderful people. So Honor Harger is the curator from New Zealand, interested in the cultural impact of scientific ideas and how futures are imagined by museums and cultural organizations. She is the director of the ArtScience Museum in Singapore and the vice president of attractions for Marina Bay Sands. At ArtScience, They present a truly extraordinary exhibitions that explore aspects of science and technology, including big data, particle physics, natural history, marine biology, cosmology, space exploration, and climate change. So Arno will be speaking a bit about this. It's worth a lot more than my kind of poor introduction, but we're very much looking forward to it. Our second speaker is Liam Young. Liam Young is a designer, director, and a BAFTA-nominated producer who operates in the spaces between design fiction and futures. Described by the BBC as, quote, "the man designing our futures," unquote. That's a heavy quote in this room.
If the shoe fits, man.
Let's imagine it in like a really neutral, lukewarm British broadcasting voice, just to take the edge off of that quote a little bit. Anyway, the man designing our futures. His visionary films and speculative worlds are both extraordinary images of tomorrow and urgent examinations of environmental questions facing us today. As a world builder, he visualizes the city spaces and props of our imaginary futures for the film and television industry. So we obviously have a lot to talk about when it comes to experiences of the future. But first, I would like to hand off to the illustrious Anna Harger.
Thank you very much, Brendan. Well, good morning, everyone. What an absolute pleasure to be here. The future is not something that we wait for. It's something that we create. At ArtScience Museum in Singapore, we embrace this ethos wholeheartedly. Our mission is to explore the intersection between art, science, culture, and technology, believing that it's in the space where these areas meet that the most transformative ideas emerge. Today, I'm going to take you on a very short journey through how ArtScience Museum enables visitors to step inside possible futures. And I'm going to focus on the work that we've done with nature and environmental themes. Our permanent exhibition is called Future World, and it's a collaboration with the Japanese art and technology collective TeamLab. With Future World, we both set out to make something that was more than a traditional exhibition in a museum. We wanted to create a world that people could step inside, that would change and transform over time, and would respond to each and every visitor. One of the most important artworks in the exhibition is 100 Years Sea. Here, TeamLab are artfully visualizing the rising sea levels caused by climate change. Using scientific data from the WWF, the artwork compresses 100 years of sea level rise into just 10 minutes. This representation makes climate change visible and immediate for the public. The idea of making the future impact of climate change visceral and real feels important to us as a museum operating in the 21st century. We also create temporary exhibitions that explore possible futures. Perhaps our most overtly future-orientated exhibition was this one here, 2219, Futures Imagined. It was developed to commemorate the Singapore Bicentennial in 2019. The exhibition took the 200-year time span of a bicentennial and projected it forward, imagining what the world would be like in the year 2219. It explored how our world might change due to climate change, biodiversity loss, and social upheaval. Here, the Design Futures studio, Superflux, are inviting us inside an apartment set in Singapore sometime later in the 21st century, amidst rising sea levels and dwindling food supplies. They're asking us, what is the family who lives here like? What books are they reading in this future? What are their children drawing? Where does their food come from? And what kind of meals are they making with this unusual food? What's the view like outside their window? And how do they navigate their world? Here, Finn Barthelen takes us into a subterranean Singapore, set sometime when the surface of the earth is no longer habitable. How was this city engineered? What does governance look like down here? What social problems exist in this underground world? Here, the artists Donna Ong and Lisa Park give us glimpses of how nature might be memorialized when we can no longer be part of it every day. Perhaps in this future, trees have taken on an almost sacred quality. And here, the theatre makers, Rimini Protocol, give us an uncanny encounter with some of the creatures that we may need to learn to live more closely with as the borders between the land and the sea become more porous. In these exhibitions and others, we're asking people to physically step inside potential futures. And we're asking, is this a future that you want to be part of? Could you find a way of surviving in this future? Could you thrive? But we don't just stop with raising awareness about the future. We want to create real-world change today. For instance, in Into the Wild, we worked hand in hand with the NGO WWF to make an augmented reality exhibition about nature. It used augmented reality to bring nature into the museum, transforming 1,000 square meters of ArtScience Museum into a virtual rainforest. Visitors could explore the forest using the smartphone device and AR technology, and then after learning about the challenges the rainforest faces, visitors planted a virtual tree into the forest. And for every virtual tree that our visitors planted, we planted a real tree in Indonesia. By the end of the project, there were 10,000 new trees in the rainforest. So whilst this project used augmented reality technology, we were not merely aiming to augment reality. We were trying to improve reality. Similarly, during our Sensory Odyssey exhibition about nature last year, visitors contributed to our mangrove tree installation. And for each leaf that they added onto our mangrove tree installation, we planted a real mangrove tree in Southeast Asia, resulting in 20,000 new mangrove trees. These projects show that exhibitions can inspire not only reflection, but action to create better futures. One of our most recent futures projects was Cesar Harada's The Ocean City Imagined. Cesar is an engineer, an environmentalist, and a designer whose work focuses on sustainable ocean futures. His exhibition explored how society might adapt to rising sea levels with new floating cities and oceanic technologies. It combines sustainable design with participatory futures practice. It showcased Cesar's groundbreaking inventions like ocean solar hydrogen, his clean energy generator, and Ocean Train, a futuristic mode of transport. But at the heart of the exhibition was this floating modular structure, a bold reimagining of urban living on water. This model imagines a thriving future community shaped by ingenuity and collaboration. And the show invited visitors to become co-creators of this future. Through storytelling workshops, participants selected Lego figures and placed them inside the ocean city and imagined lives for these characters in this new world. This playful yet poignant exercise gave visitors agency in these potential futures. Cesar also worked hand in hand with Singapore's underrepresented Indigenous community, the Kristang. Their architectural models, developed with support from the Next Generation Foresight Practitioners Grant, brought authenticity into the exhibition. Christang facilitators joined us to guide visitors, weaving their perspectives into these imagined futures. And this created something very special, a dialogue between speculative design and Indigenous heritage. The Ocean City Imagined showed how museums can create spaces where visitors and communities come together to tell new stories about futures where people and the environment can live more harmoniously. At ArtScience Museum, we believe that museums have the power to bridge the present and the future, inviting the public to imagine what comes next. Our exhibitions are designed to do more than inspire hope. They aim to spark curiosity, invite reflection, and most importantly for us, to build courage. As climate scientist Kate Marvel reminds us, we need courage, not hope. Courage is a resolve to do well without the assurance of a happy ending. Through our work, we create spaces where visitors can step into possible futures, confront challenges, and imagine their role in creating solutions. These experiences empower the public not only to envision the future, but to face it with determination and resolve, to understand that the future is unwritten and it's ours to shape. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honor. Okay, next, the man designing our futures, and also just simply the man, Liam Young.
So as Brendan mentioned, I tell stories. I tell stories about the future, but really I tell stories with and about space. I'm a director. I'm often called a speculative architect, most often called a world builder, meaning that although trained as an architect, I don't design buildings, but instead I make films. I build imaginary worlds for the entertainment industry. I tell stories about the architectural, the urban, and the cultural implications of new technologies. So whether it be our own projects for museums or world building for film and TV in LA, where I'm based, we use imagined fictional worlds as sites in which to explore important ideas, not just to sell backdrops for some superhero moment, but rather because we're interested in the ways that fiction is an extraordinary shared language. It's how our culture shares and disseminates ideas. We're all literate in stories, and narratives of imagined worlds can help us to visualize possible futures that sometimes feel all too inescapable. And I'm interested in exploring new planetary imaginaries with our work. And to do this, my process of world building begins here with a deep engagement with the extremes of the present as we travel to the atomized landscapes around the world that lie behind the scenes of contemporary technologies. These are the landscapes that have remade our planet from the scale of the cell to the tectonic plate. And our speculative narratives begin in this documentary work, and through a process of extrapolation and exaggeration, we use the power of fiction to communicate complex ideas about our changing world. For example, to develop one of our most recent works, Planet City, a single city for the entire population of the Earth, we traveled to, researched and filmed the mega-scale renewable energy sites that already exist around the world today, the world's largest thermal solar field, the illuminated indoor farms protecting crops from harsh Siberian winters, the world's largest algae farm, Western Australia. And we go here because these monumental infrastructures are evidence that so much of the technologies required to regenerate our climate are actually already here. And we extrapolate these systems into the fictional landscapes here of this imaginary planet city. Alongside the canals of Planet City, a single city for 10 billion people, the projected global population of the world in 2050. If we listen, we can hear the hums and crackles, flickering blue and red LEDs that illuminate the lower reaches of the city's farm fields. It smells of soil and hard drives and sweet fruit. We're all bathed in a purple sunrise over a new kind of wild. Seminal biologist Edward O. Wilson, he once imagined a world that he called half-Earth. It was a plan to stave off mass extinction by devoting half the surface of the Earth completely to nature. But of course the byproduct of Wilson's global park would be the massive consolidation of our existing cities and lifestyles that would be required to withdraw to the remaining 50% of Earth. And this really is the speculation where our planet city begins. What if we were to design and visualize this radical reversal of our planetary sprawl? Because such extraordinary crises require the most radical and bold responses. How far could we push Wilson's proposal to save the Earth? Because in its most provocative form, if we were to reorganize our world at the intensity of even just the densest cities that already exist, then this planet city could occupy as little as 0.02% Earth. So we collaborated with scientists and technologists to design and simulate what could happen if we removed the political roadblocks or the lack of cultural investment that currently holds these renewable energy technologies back, and visualize how they could operate at global scales. But Planet City in the end is not a proposal, rather it's a provocation, a thought experiment that shows us if we can imagine these systems working at this scale, then the only thing stopping us rewilding and exploring and consolidating our existing cities is ourselves, our own biases and blind spots, our own politics and prejudices. And we also explore the implications of these planetary scaled systems at the scale of the body. In this work, we've developed a new choreography that distorts our silhouette and disguises the proportions of our bodies so that we're able to evade body detection algorithms that are used by next-generation city surveillance systems. So the white lines that we see are the visualizations of the code that's mapping and remapping our bodies, searching for an image of the figures that it's been trained on. And as the algorithm fails, the body vanishes, it blurs, and is lost in this flurry of flesh. And as they dance, they enact a new vocabulary of movement that is exuberant in plain sight. But through the eyes of the machines, two bodies become one, entangled and fractured with fuzzy frames and lost connections. And these same machine vision algorithms that map our every move, they're also purposed to enact our fantasies of AR and robot-filled futures. This is some of the mixed reality and robots that we designed for Mahershala Ali's film Swan Song. This is the future that sci-fi promises us. But we can't have this future without the other, without systems of AI governance, without this management of the city that was once publicly elected, now being outsourced to proprietary software systems and large-scale tech companies, and public services disappearing into the fog of the cloud. Perhaps we're not citizens, but instead customers of tomorrow's cities, skylines filled with the digital confetti of our desired world projected just for us. And that's in many ways what we try and do, to embed within the mediums of popular culture, just like Trojan horses, critical ideas about who we are, who we're becoming, and the worlds that we're making. And finally, if we leave the city center, beyond the dancing bodies, beyond the caress of AI, the scale of planetary infrastructure that we explore in our documentary films has already terraformed the Earth. But those same machines are now needed to pull the carbon back out of the contaminated air. But even if we were to build something like Planet City and in its wake grow back the great forests, they would still need our help to draw down the hundreds of years of billowing black smoke that already fills our skies. In our generation, out on these vast seas, we'll need to begin to build a new planetary infrastructure equivalent in scale to the current entire global fossil fuel industry. This is going to amount to the largest construction project in our history, our great endeavor. Really a constellation of CO2 sequestration fans and drilling rigs that would suck air through their filters, transforming airborne carbon into a liquefied gas to be pumped deep beneath the ocean floor or desert rock. Empowered by 1,000 wind turbines dragged to a grid, the salt spray fresh in the air, this is really our generation's moon landing. It's a mobilization of resources on a planetary scale that would only be possible through international cooperation to an extent that's never before been achieved. And the whip of blades drive this coordinated action to decolonize the atmosphere and engineer our new sky and perhaps our great last act of planetary transformation. Our utopian visions of the future in many ways are still haunted by the failed ideals of boomer environmentalism and the mythology of localized actions and small individual gestures have all guilted us into the belief that it's just our personal choices that really have warmed this world. And meanwhile, in the shadows, the planetary scaled visions, the systemic systems that we see in popular culture, they're typically industrial and dystopian. They're the work of the Bond villain or the evil megacorporation. But in this moment, we desperately need new visions of sustainable futures that are both radical, global, and collective in scale. So we might leave behind the tropes of previous generations, where cyberpunk imagined the messy subcultures of the virtual, and instead, this planetary park, our planet city, these new machines are all artifacts of what we could imagine as a new kind of planetary punk, a world that embraces the ideological, the cultural consequences of planetary scaled collective action. So all these projects, they're produced in the hope that we might keep making stories, and all of us, especially those in this room, might keep building worlds that become vessels for critical ideas about our collective futures. Because ultimately, somewhere after the end of the world, we all need to find our futures again. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. This is experiencing futures, so I think we should talk about experiences and futures. But ultimately, I think we'll get there. To begin, I'd like to actually, and I would also just say, like, Liam, your phrase, like, we desperately need new visions of the future, I would really like to seize on that idea, because certainly the museum is an expression of that. And we're in active desperation in that sense, really dedicated on a day-to-day, minute-by-minute basis to try to suggest different possibilities that hopefully are empowering to people. But to begin, I actually would like to zoom out and talk about like the sort of twin topics that kind of define your institution and in your work in a lot of ways, art and science. I think when it comes to the future, people assume that science and especially technology is kind of going to drive it. And on the other hand, art, I mean, in all of our practices, art is applied to sort of help people understand what that technology is, but also what it could be and what its implications could be. So I'm just curious for both of you to respond to, on the one hand, how do you sort of see science, the role of science, the kind of its unique contribution to thinking about the future, art, and then where is the kind of overlap that you try to kind of engage?
Well, for me, part of the reason why our institution is interested in this dialogue and this kind of intertwingling between art and science is that we believe that art has immense emotional power to change people's, kind of hearts and minds. And science and technology, of course, has incredible power to drive innovation and to, kind of speak to us intellectually. And neither art or science alone are going to be enough to create systemic change. We need both together working in dialogue. They have unique power when brought together in dialogue, I think, to offer us alternative ways of thinking about the future and indeed experiencing the future.
Yeah, I mean, really at the core of it, I'm just a science illustrator deep down, like in the long lineage of artists that have played a role, like the artists in NASA that would visualize, new missions and somehow give visual form to really complex ideas that are often buried inside peer-reviewed journals or get spoken about at really dry science conferences that meet quotas for tenured academic positions and so on. So I think there's an extraordinary power in taking those ideas that are so critical to who we are and who we could be and finding forms through which we can get them out into the world. I mean, part of my move from Europe to Los Angeles relatively recently was to try and co-opt this massive machine of entertainment to tell other kinds of stories, the sorts of stories that are fundamental to the science of the earth. And we, every Friday night we sit in front of a screen and flickering images wash over us and they can make us laugh or cry. These fictions, these stories, the artists that make them have such power to connect us emotionally to ideas. So I'm interested in this process of data dramatization, the way that we might imbue the hard data of science with emotion and power so that people are forced to somehow engage with them on other kinds of levels that might otherwise be easily dismissed.
Yeah, so actually I'm curious, Sana, for you to, in a way, also expand on that, this notion of almost translation, basically, where you find a really fascinating insight. It's buried in a PowerPoint that's like incomprehensible, and then you have to work together to try to figure out a way to communicate that in ways. I'm curious about your own experiences doing that.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the, kind of the beautiful powers that I think museums have. We have this unique platform of having visitors come to us every day. And, your museum, Brendan, and mine, we have, 1 million visitors a year. And, that's a unique privilege. And what stories we tell, what facts we share, what complexity we try and unpack really matters with the privilege of that platform. So we never shy away from, delving into difficult topics in ArtScience Museum. I'm very pleased by the fact that we've done very large-scale exhibitions about both particle physics and quantum mechanics. And hopefully people left those exhibitions understanding something about topics that even scientists find very difficult to speak about in an accessible way. But I think the work that we're most passionate about, which I spoke about in the presentation, is trying to share with our visitors the state of planetary health, and moreover, what they can do about it. I think that the era for museums and public institutions telling the public that climate change is a problem has gone. You know, kind of that may have been the task a decade or 2 decades ago. The challenge now is to create action and to entertain actually proposals such as the ones that Liam shared in his presentation about radical solutions and create a safe space for the public to come to grips kind of with what the ethical, societal and political implications of some of these radical solutions, what they might be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the ways in which your exhibition, where you sort of plant a virtual tree and you plant a real tree, is so powerful, because one of the big obvious conclusions or questions that you get when you've exposed somebody to a possible future is like, yeah, and so what? Yeah. So the fact that you actually built into the experience a way to do something in the present and in the real world is, I think, yeah, extremely admirable.
And it's really important because it's not just about the trees, you know, in the grand scheme of things, 30,000 new trees in the world, whilst it's laudable, is not actually going to make a huge amount of difference. But the heart impact of each of those visitors knowing my action planted that tree, that's where the real power, I think, is.
Yeah, so I think that's also interesting about the differences. Like, that's a very small scale, intimate concept and also action. And Liam, you're so grand in your scale. So I'm just curious, do you ever get that sort of feedback, that sort of this majestic, epic vision is inspiring and you know, critical in lots of important ways, but narrowing it down to something that feels a bit more human scale?
Yeah, I mean, I get a lot of people yelling at me and telling me how wrong I am, definitely.
That's for the end of the talk.
Yeah, well, the idea is that, like, I mean, as I tried to articulate a little bit in the presentation, like, we're coming out of a period where, you know, there was this emphasis on localism. And maybe in the 60s and 70s, when we began having those conversations, we had a chance, but generations on, the scale of crises we've created for ourselves is just so large and extraordinary that those solutions that we still hold on to, we still see when we close our eyes and we think about a utopian future, are just no longer fit for purpose. Meanwhile, as I mentioned, like larger scale visions, they're typically cased as the dystopian. You know, density is congested and something to avoid as opposed to being a possible solution. So we find ourselves in this situation where, despite knowing that we need to do something, we have no collective agreement around which we can think about what we need to do, never mind actually doing something about it. So we try and put into the world provocative visions of a future that are desperately pragmatic, extreme pragmatism, if anything, as a means to start to introduce to people to these ideas so that we can start to share conversations around what kind of futures we want to have. You know, like when you see Planet City and, you know, bathed in this purple light, which is actually the light of blue and red LEDs that you see in indoor farms and the world's largest vertical farm, which is just actually up the road here in Dubai. We need to start thinking about that as the way that we might produce our food in the future, not as some dystopian cautionary tale, but because the idea of waking up with sunrise and milking the chickens and you know, going down to our community garden in Brooklyn just doesn't feed 10 billion people. So we need to be dealing with controversy, we need to be dealing with provocation, and we need to be creating images that aren't polite, but that are radical in scope and scale and how we imagine their influence.
And you know, to add to this as well, the absence in popular culture of these visions of the future that are neither utopian or dystopian is a really big problem.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons why the Museum of the Future here in Dubai is so important, to kind of share alternative visions about the future that are neither utopian or dystopian. They're kind of in the middle, maybe protopian. Because if we don't have those visions in our mind, we've got no idea how to kind of tack into the future with some kind of intentionality. And images, whether it's movies, you know, kind of, or, or books or music, they really do shape our imagination. They're not just fun aspects of popular culture, they actually kind of define where culture goes. So these projects are super important, I think, for that.
Yeah, I mean, actually, when we first started working on the museum, that was one of our things, is that in addition to the kind of array of interlocking crises that you have toward the future, climate, demographics, technology, everything else, ours was like the crisis of imagination, basically, whereas if you are not capable of imagining a better future, or you don't even feel, or you feel that it's kind of like painfully naive to do that, that's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy at a certain point, and it doesn't. But actually, Liam, something you said that I think is really interesting, this notion of the kind of glow of the vertical farm, because I think what's also interesting about experiencing futures is the evolving nature of what is beautiful, because I think that's a thing that if we were to get there, we would somehow have to feel that that's a beautiful space and it's not some oppressive, thing. So I'm just curious about that aspect of the work you do.
Yeah, I mean, in the work, hopefully you get a sense of it from just this little 10-minute window. We try and co-opt the visual language of the sublime, or what David and I would describe as the technological sublime. The way that we think about the shipping containers drifting across the tarmac of the world's largest shipping port, or these giant fans spinning on these carbon sequestration plants, the way that we can use language that we might once have used to talk about daffodils and rolling hills as a means to bring these kind of infrastructures into the popular imagination, into a cultural space. Because I talk about this idea that climate change is no longer a technological problem. Like in many cases, the technologies, the solutions we need are already here. They've been here for 10 or 15 years. We're not waiting for some new TED talk for some solution to be declared and we figure it out and give Elon Musk a bunch of money and he's going to go off and build it for us. Instead, we really find ourselves in no longer a technological crisis, but as you mentioned, a crisis of the imagination, or a cultural or political crisis. And what that means is if we want to make work that resonates in the context of futures, it needs to exist in a cultural and political space, not a technological space. So that's why the work of your museum is critical. Coincidentally, we're opening a show in Melbourne in end of November called The Future and Other Fictions, which is a history of world building and practices. And it began as a show called Generous Futures, actually, where we were trying to bring together all of the aspirational images that have appeared in popular culture on screen and so on. And there just wasn't enough to fill a show in many ways. So it became to be a show about how you make your own futures, how you build worlds, to try and empower audiences with the ability to start to tell their own stories about the futures that they want to live in. Again, because we are in this crisis of the imagination, and it's those kind of stories that are actually going to help mobilize change, I think.
Okay, we're running out of time, which I think is a tragedy, but I'm just going to make a bold move for our final question, just seizing on the word sublime that you used. So we talked about art and science. I'd say these are the kind of two pillars that kind of bind civilization and kind of bind us, obviously, to our descendants and our ancestors. I would say the third pillar is religion. And I'm curious if either of you kind of factor into that, this notion of the spiritual, the notion of faith in this kind of understanding of how we would get to a different future and how that needs to kind of absorb these things which are kind of timeless concerns and concerns which transcend art and science, but kind of, in a way, need to engage them if they're going to work.
Yeah, I think that pillar is incredibly important, and we might think of religion more broadly as spirituality and how we connect, kind of the heart, which, perhaps is represented kind of by art, the head, which is represented by science, and the soul, which is what our spiritual traditions are, kind of so important at nurturing and manifesting. And I think we've leaned into this in our own way with kind of the museum in the museum by surfacing up these traditions and shows that are ostensibly about the future, like 2219, but ended with small rituals that come from Singapore's religions, whether they be Buddhism, Taoism, Islam, or Christianity, in saying that these are the systems of belief that are the most resilient to future shocks. It's not buildings, it's not culture, it's actually kind of traditional beliefs that tend to be the most resilient systems that take us from the present to the future, and can teach us a lot, I think, about how our forms of storytelling can become resilient to the kinds of adaptations that we're going to need to make.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, again, you can see in some of our films, like we really try and emphasize futures that are filled with costume and dance and mythology and ritual, in a way as an antidote to a lot of the science fiction that we see out in the world, where it's imagined that any sufficiently advanced technology that somehow has dealt with the problems that we've created for ourselves have evolved away from these things, that somehow mythology or folklore or ritual are things that are a part of who we once were, not who we aspire to be. But we've always created these stories as a way of dealing with newness and a way of dealing with the unknown. You know, when we didn't understand why the sun rose and fell or why crops did better in some parts of the year and others, we would invent stories. We would imagine the earth on the back of mythical creatures. We would invent monsters that would fall off the edge of maps, and we're always going to do that. And, you know, especially in the light of new ecologies and new technologies and new systems that are coming at us, what that's just going to mean is we're going to create new stories and new mythologies and new rituals. And I think we desperately need to lean into the cultural implications of these systems that we're building and imagine how they actually become assimilated in who we are.
Okay, Honor, Liam, thank you so much, and thank you all for presenting.
السيدات والسادة، الآن مع كلمة رئيسية حول إطلاق تقرير حالة